The history of foundations, for example, one of the very first foundations was the Rockefeller Foundation, and it was started by John D. Rockefeller. And it was started because John D. Rockefeller was traveling with his minister, who was a guy named Frederick Gates, who was a Baptist. And Frederick Gates is a very, very important figure in philanthropy, kind of a hidden figure. We don't hear that much about him, but he was very, very influential. And they were traveling through West Virginia, and Rockefeller, this is very interesting, John D. Rockefeller was a very complicated person in a lot of ways. Rockefeller looked out at all these, how people were living in the mining towns that he owned, and he said to Gates, if these people continue to live like this, they will rebel. People cannot continue to be this poor. And what are we going to do? And Gates was like, yeah, that's really true. So they hurried on back to New York. I'm kind of shortening this story, and they pulled together a bunch of other similar robber barons, and they said, what are we going to do? Because people are going to rise up, okay? We have to do something, and they created foundations. And the actually stated purpose of the Rockefeller Foundation in the beginning, now this is no longer, they modernized it, was to ameliorate poverty. You know, by which he meant, in a good way, you know, to make people less poor, but not to make them not poor. But we don't know.
I think they could actually pay more to the miners.
No, that was not one of the choices. Pay more to the miners, and worker justice and stuff like that. Yeah, and so in what ways do we cooperate with that? Okay, both by how we provide service, but also even by the funding that we take, by our refusal to draw lines in the sand and say we will not do this work. With government, I work with a lot of human service agencies. So I say to them, why don't you just say we will not provide this work for the money you're now paying us? Every single time a human service agency takes a cut from the government but continues to provide service for less money, they say to the right wing, you were right, we could do this work for less money. And it's a problem, and in this way we absolutely cooperate with enclosure. Okay, any other little thoughts about how are we in the commons, and also how are we in the commons, how should we be in the commons? Maybe we need to resist that, how are we instruments of enclosure? Cooper.
We may have touched on this a little bit. Maybe another aspect of enclosure is kind of the necessity sometimes of nonprofits doing work driven by foundation interest or corporate funders rather than the populations they serve.
Yes. Yeah, doing work driven by funders as opposed to by mission, or even as opposed to by constituents. So we become very driven. And as funders have gotten more and more aggressive in saying this is what we want to see, this is what we want to do. And I would see it even with the Social Innovation Fund that's coming down from the Obama administration. Okay, that's very, I think it's very, very driven. And so it's $50 million to be spent in 50 states. And a friend of mine was on the call the other day where people to learn how to apply for the Social Innovation Fund, and there were 1,000 people on the call. Wow. I mean, you know, it's kind of, so this will be an example also of the government doing that as well. So we have that notion of enclosure. We also have a lot of professionalization. This is my kind of pet peeve of our enclosure. I mean, I am a professional, so I'm not an anti-professional. But I see that a lot of times people will say, young people even will come to me and they'll say, I want to have a career in the not-for-profit sector. I'm like, that's great. And they'll say, should I go to school? Should I get a degree? Some of you know the University of Indiana is now offering a Bachelor of Arts in Nonprofit Management. Should I get a degree? Should I get a certification? Should I start at this kind of agency or that kind of agency? And it's all, these are legitimate questions. But the question they don't ask is, the first question you have to ask if you're really to be in the commons, which is, what do you believe? This is what I ask them. What do you believe in? What do you believe in? What kind of society do you want to see? Then, let's start with that, and then let's make a career for you out of that. And we lose that with this intense professionalization. And of course, this has also driven a lot of volunteers. You know, so things are left more and more to professionals and less to volunteers. And volunteers, and a lot of social justice groups won't even use that word volunteer because they feel it has no, it sounds so trivial. Okay, and they use the word activist and so on. That's great, but in a way, I'd like to bring it back. I'd like to say volunteer is a very serious person. It's not some, you know, not just some person kind of hanging out, figuring out how to pass the time.
I think we can contribute to enclosure by siloing.
Okay, say more about that.
Well, really just sort of being hyper-focused on, let's say it's, you know, environmental justice in your community or whatever, and leaving out the other collaboratives. I mean, nonprofits really need to, you know, focus on collaboration and the benefits of it and the commons that would be part of collaboration, but really do a core job of saying, okay, if we address this your issue, that will address my issue. And your issue will address the bigger picture here, and so we'll get to a resolution quicker, faster, easier. I mean, I think we're starting to get forced into it through funders, but again, that's, you know, how long have we known that we need to do it, but now that funders are saying do it, we're like, oh, okay, we'll do it, we'll get out of our silo, but,
Well, when we get out of one silo, just get into
we're just
another.
going to another, exactly.
That they create.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really big one. So we should be in the commons, in some ways we aren't.
I was just gonna add, another enclosure would be that we never really work ourselves out of a job,
Yes,
which the commons would accomplish.
yes. So really, if we were to be in the commons, we would say our work, the goal of our work is to become non-essential.
Nice.
Yeah, that's a really big one. I see with my clients will call, like I have a homeless shelter. They put together this brochure and it said, you can make sure, that's a picture of a homeless person on it, you can make sure that so-and-so always has shelter with your request, your planned gift. I'm like, I don't want to make sure of that. You know, I want to imagine a world in which there are no homeless people. That's definitely a big one.
I think there's a large amount of pressure in the nonprofit world to not epitomize the type of working conditions that we are trying, that we hold up as being good in the for-profit world. A lot of the goals of equitable workplaces and in terms of gender issues, in terms of safety issues, in terms of length of day issues, you know, all of that. I think we just say, well, we work for a nonprofit, those are not our issues.
So you think there's a lot of pressure to not lift up that which is good about the corporate sector in terms of work.
Correct.
So we work long days, low pay, no benefits.
Exactly, and I think that it doesn't honor, I think, some of the large amount of work people have done in the for-profit sector in terms of union work and other work to make those advances.
And yet, the thing that comes over from the corporate sector, we're supposed to learn, is not that, but we're supposed to learn that you have to pay your CEO, well, first of all, you can call them CEOs, not executive directors, and you have to pay them way more money and way more benefits, right? We don't, the workday and stuff like that isn't so addressed. So a lot of pressure to be martyred. One more thing and then we'll get into groups, yes.
At first when you first asked if nonprofits should be in the common places, my first reaction was no, because I thought that meant that the common folk would make decisions about the mission of that nonprofit. But after talking about it, I'm like, okay, it should be in the common place, meaning that the people should have access to the services that these nonprofits provide, which I don't really feel like is very equal, because you're saying how much money is spent with these nonprofits, but actually they're spent with a small portion of it. So there's still someone making decisions about which nonprofits are even going to keep getting this money. So I don't think it should be in a common place, but it's not, because all nonprofits don't even get a chance to service people because somebody else is making those decisions.
Right. So and this is related actually to what Rachel said. We duplicate the inequality in our sector that we supposedly address. We're trying to address, and it's a little bit difficult. What I'd like you to do is kind of think on this and think about if you think, and again, you're welcome to think no, nonprofit shouldn't be part of the commons. That or that some should and some shouldn't. I mean, we're not saying absolutely we should. But insofar as you think that your nonprofit, now really focusing on your nonprofit, because we're not all nonprofits here, we're a cross section of them. Insofar as you think your nonprofit, okay, and those of you who aren't from a specific nonprofit, focus on somebody else who's at your table. Just kind of maybe pick one. Should be in the commons. Okay. How would you address your? We're going to do two things. We're going to look at how would you address your mission, the work that you do, from a commons perspective. And some of you may think, well, we already are. And then you can describe how that is. That's great. And then some of you may think we'd have to change a little bit. If you were really to say on a daily basis, we want to have this commons frame that we kind of pulled out when we looked at these issues, and then we pulled out a little bit more this morning. What would that look like at our nonprofit in terms of mission? We'll take about 10 or 15 minutes on that, because I think that's going to be, I could be wrong, a slightly easier conversation than the one I want to move us into, which is then when we look at the struggles we have as nonprofits, funding, pressure for outcomes from funders, competition with other nonprofits, hiring staff, all the struggles that you have, you can kind of